Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of artbyrow.com, where you can find over 200 art and drawing tutorials and everything art related. Thank you for joining me today, and we're going to head on over to the art studio and do some drawings. I hope you'll grab a pencil and some paper and draw along with us today. I know you'll have fun. Let's head on over to the studio. Here we go. Let's draw Santa Claus. I got my supplies ready. I'm doing this on an artist trading card. That's typically how I work because it saves me a lot of time, and I really enjoy trading them to other artists for their work. So I have my artist trading card. You can do it on whatever type of paper you want. I work on cardstock because I usually use markers for my color, and the cardstock works great for the marker. I have my pencil that I typically use. This is my favorite drawing pencil. I have an eraser for cleaning up my pencil lines. And then I have an outlining pen that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then my big eraser for cleaning up my drawing after I'm done outlining. So I'm going to start by laying out some basic shapes. And this is important for a lot of reasons. For one thing, it gets you past that, what we call the blank page syndrome, where you got a blank piece of paper and you're just kind of staring at it, and it feels a little bit intimidating to get started. So if we start with some basic shapes, it lets us get those first marks on the paper. It allows us to get everything proportioned correctly, get it placed on our paper correctly, get the size right. So I'm just starting with a circle, and then I'm gonna section it off in each direction about halfway. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't stress out too much. This is gonna be where the center of his face will be. His mouth will be down here. And then, of course, Santa needs to have a big beard. So we'll just make an indication of where his beard's going to be. And then his body will come out down here somewhere. And we're working in pencil, so any of it can be changed. And then, of course, Santa needs to have a hat. So we're not going to do any real details right now. We're just getting the basic structure down to give us something to work with when we're ready to start adding our details. So we can kind of get an idea of what our Santa's going to look like and how big he's going to be. I usually will let my drawings just run off the paper. Don't feel like everything has to fit within that window of your whatever paper you're using, whether it's a sketchbook or if you're trying artist trading cards or whatever it is that you're working on. Don't feel like it has to all be squeezed in there. Let it go off the edge of the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and put his nose right here in the middle, a little bit underneath where the middle is, so I have some room for his eyes. I'm just drawing an oval for his nose. There are so many different ways that you can draw everything. The nose, the eyes. And each thing that you change will give you a little bit different variation on the overall look of the finished drawing. So keep that in mind when you're doing your drawings. And I like doing a series of a theme. So like when I do my Santa Claus drawings, I like to do 7 of them. And the reason I do this is because it really gives you some opportunity to try some new things, push your creativity a little bit, experiment. I found that if you do just one drawing of something, you really miss out on the opportunities to come up with some interesting and fun, unique designs. Which is another reason why I really love working on the artist trading cards, is because when doing the artist trading cards, because they're smaller, they save you a lot of time. It gives you the opportunity to do a series of them, and you're not spending like hours and hours on your drawings. So I did his mustache course again. Lots of different ways you can do this. Put his mouth in here. I'll add a little indication of the tongue. And I'm not going super detailed. If you wanted to draw a more realistic Santa Claus, by all means, you can do that. I'm going for more of a cartoon style. So I'm going to start drawing in the top of his hat. And I want to put some little wrinkles and folds in here. I think it looks better if you break it up a little bit instead of just having everything being just straight across. I like having some little edges on here, but that's just part of the style that I like to draw in. You can do yours however you want. I'm just going to keep working through this, adding in the details, drawing in his hat. And again, I'm not worrying that it's going off the edge of the paper. That's really not going to hurt anything. And you can clean up your drawing as you go, just to make sure you know what you're keeping, what you're not. If there's areas where it's not completely obvious, you don't want to accidentally trace over the wrong lines when you're doing your outline. I'm just going to tighten that up a little bit. Come in here, do the shape of his head. And again, I'm not being super detailed with any of this. Which you could try doing, like I said, if you do a series of them, you could try several different styles and come up with a design for your Santa Clauses that maybe you kind of stick with sort of one design later on when you, after you play around with it a little bit and get an idea of the look that you like and the look that you want to go for. So I think with his beard, I'm going to let it just come right up to his mouth. You could add like a little area down here if you wanted to. Again, that's just your own personal preference. And I think I want to make his shoulders higher up. I'll make his shoulders come up here. So that's pretty much it for the sketch. Not much left to do on it. Like I said, I don't want to put too many specific details because I want to keep it just simple, cartoony. So the next step is going to be to add an outline. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a Sharpie pen that I do my outlining with. I like to outline in black. That's just part of my style. That's the look that I like. You can do your outline however you want. I like the Sharpie pens. There's a lot of different types of pens and markers you could use for outlining your drawings, or maybe you don't want to outline them at all. Totally up to you. Brush pens work really well. They are a little bit harder to control, so they do take a little bit of practice to get the lines to look the way you want them to look. So it is something that takes a little bit more skill to use the brush pens, because the way the brush pen works is as you apply more pressure, the line gets wider. So the reason that I say it takes a little bit more skill and it's something you have to practice with is you have to be able to control that pressure and the thick and the thin of your lines while you're staying where you want the pen to go. So in the brush markers, let me see if I can find one. This is an example of a brush marker. I don't know if you can really see how that is, but it's got a long brush tip on it. And as you put pressure on it, it makes the line wider. So you can have really nice thick and thin lines, but you have to control that pressure that you're putting on it and control the movement of it and where it's going to stay going over top of your lines where you want it to go. And because it has a soft brush tip on it, it kind of does its own thing a little bit more because it's soft, it's flexible, and it moves. And it's a lot longer. So using just this regular style pen, it has the hard tip, you know where your pen's gonna go. So, but the brush pens, if you get used to them, you get good with them, it makes some really, really nice looking outlines. But you can do the same thing with just a regular pen. If you want thicker lines, you'll just have to go over it and thicken it up that way, which is okay. I find it really relaxing to do that. For some reason, I'm not sure why. It should be a little bit of a tedious process, but for whatever reason, doing the outlines like that and going over it, for whatever reason, I find very calming and very relaxing. So it's just, again, personal preference. You can also use a thicker marker if you wanted, which I've been playing around with a little bit lately, but what I find is that the thicker markers, they tend to kind of bleed out on the paper a little bit. It's kind of subtle. It's not, it's not real obvious, but it does bleed into the paper. Even with using the heavy cardstock, it still will bleed into the paper. It doesn't make as sharp of an outline. So I prefer, as you can see, I'm going over and making a heavier outline around the outside edge. And if I used a marker, I could do it all at once. But I like how sharp of an outline I get with this type of a pen. So that's it for the outline. The next thing to do is to take an eraser to clean up the pencil lines. And I have two different types of erasers. I used to always use the pink pearl erasers, and these work really well. The only thing I don't like about them is that you have to periodically clean them, because if you don't, this graphite will transfer onto your paper. So you have to be careful with how dirty it is. And I had this eraser just in my art supplies, and I honestly have no idea where it even came from. And I really like that it's almost like a self-cleaning eraser, because as you're erasing, you get a lot of eraser mess off of it, which is kind of, takes a little bit of cleanup. It's a little bit annoying, but it's not too bad. But what I found with this eraser is because it comes apart as you're using it, you don't have to worry about getting those smudges on your paper. But like I said, it does create a bit of a mess. And it requires a little bit of cleanup. Not a big deal, nothing terrible, nothing we can't work with. But is a little bit of a mess that you have to clean up. But so there's our outline. And I'm going to go grab me some markers. I'm going to be using markers today. You can use whatever you like to use for your color, whether that's watercolors or acrylics or colored pencils. I like using markers, so I'm going to go grab some markers real quick, and I will be back to discuss how I use markers to add color and how I go about choosing the colors I want to use. All right, so I got my colors, and I use alcohol markers, which a lot of markers that are out there are going to be alcohol based. So Bic markers are alcohol based, Sharpies. I like these touch markers. I use these quite a bit. So when picking the colors that you want to use, and this is the way that I do my colors. It's just one way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways, but what I do is I have these little scrap papers that I have left over from cutting out my artist trading cards, and I'll test out my colors on the scrap piece of paper so I know which ones go good together. And then what I usually do is I'll pick 2 or 3 markers that will blend nicely, and that's what I use. Now, of course, this is for the style of drawings that I like to do. You may have to find a different method of adding your colors if your art style is different. Maybe you don't like using the 2 colors. Maybe you just want it to be a solid, more of a flat look to it. But what I'll do is I'll put my light color down first, and then I'll take the darker color and go in where there would be some shadows and put the darker color in, and then go back with the lighter color and go over top of where the 2 come together. And then I just do that for the entire drawing. And if you work like this, you need to make sure you're working in just one section at a time, because you don't want the alcohol from the marker to evaporate before you're finished getting your colors blended together. And I've had people ask me, like, won't it ruin your markers to go back over top of it? And it will not. I've never had the marker transfer onto another marker, so you don't have to worry about it muddying up your markers. They're not going to transfer. And you can mix and match different brands. I started using markers maybe, let's see, about 10 years ago, I guess. A little longer than that. Maybe about 12, 13 years ago. I started playing around with markers when I was teaching in a classroom. We were doing some graffiti art lessons, and I started playing around with markers back then. And over the years, I've accumulated some different brands, some different styles, And they've changed a lot over the years. And what I mean by that is, I'll show you an example. I have some Prismacolors were the first nice set of markers that I bought. And a lot of markers are dual tip, where they have a wide, usually a chisel tip at one end, and then a finer tip at the other end. And what I found with these Prismacolor is that this fine tip, for one thing, is too fine. It's kind of like you could use it to outline, but it doesn't really work very well to color. But the other thing I found with it is that that fine tip dries out, so it's really kind of useless. The only thing that you can use on it is that wide tip, and it's actually, for the most part, it's too wide. It's too hard to try to control where your color's going. But I have noticed that I think Prismacolor changed the design of that marker. I don't even think they sell those like that anymore. I think that's an outdated style. So they do change quite a bit. Most companies are going to try to improve on their designs. They probably had some feedback from their customers. I'm sure I'm not the only one that found that fine tip that they had on there didn't work very well. So what I'm doing now is adding in some gray to add a little bit of shadow, some shading where all the white areas are. So things like the hat, his mustache, the beard, just to break up those big areas of white. And I'm not really doing anything specific necessarily. I just want to break up the white areas. And then to lighten it up, I'm going back over it with an even lighter gray, which this gray is so light that you actually really can't even see it on the paper. You can also use a colorless blender, which will do the same thing. It doesn't have any color, it just has the alcohol in it, I'm assuming. And then you can use that to go in with the different colors to blend them together. So I'm not being super specific with where I'm adding the gray to the white. I really just want to not have these big areas of white in here. If you wanted to do something more detailed, you could put in your light source and, you know, which direction would your light be coming from and do your shadows that way. But to be honest, I really don't put that much thought into the drawings because I do them just for myself. It's a way for me to relax. So when I'm working, I really don't want to overthink things and put too much pressure on the outcome. If I'm feeling relaxed and I'm enjoying the drawing, then to me, that's a successful work of art, because that's why I create art, is because I find it relaxing and enjoyable. I'm not trying to sell my artwork or be in art shows in a gallery or anything like that. I do them strictly for pure enjoyment for myself. And if you're someone who just enjoys drawing, you like creating art, then I encourage you to find a way to focus less on the outcome and more on the process and the enjoyment you get from the creation process itself. Because if you're doing it for yourself, then does the outcome really matter? I mean, we all want to get better. We all want our drawings to come out nice. But what's more important, for me anyway, is that the process is enjoyable and I get the relaxation from it that I'm after. So for the skin, I just have a peach color. And then I put some pink in there. And then just blend those two colors together. Then the only thing left to do is his lips. And then the background. I think I'm just going to use some gray to darken up this pink area right here. Darken up his mouth a little bit. The other thing I should mention is that if you layer the same color on top of itself, it will darken it up a little bit. It won't darken it up a ton, but it will add more pigment over top of it, especially if you let it dry first and add more layers. It'll darken it up, not significantly, but each time you go back over a color and add another layer to it, it's going to get a little bit darker. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your drawings. So if you're working on your drawings and you really like the way an area looks, and maybe you think, well, I'm going to go back in real quick and just touch an area up or whatever, keep in mind that if you keep working an area, it's going to get a little bit darker as you keep working it and adding more colors to it. So as you can see where I went back over top with this, it's a little bit darker there. So it's not a big deal. You just need to know that that's how the markers work. And kind of work around it and keep that in your mind as you're going and fit it into your process. And it does kind of lighten up a little bit as the alcohol evaporates out. So you can see like this right here is more noticeable than the one I did earlier. So I think that's about it for the colors. I have the background finished. I put some gray in the beard. The last thing that I do on my drawings is that I use a white jelly roll pen to add some highlights to the drawing. And again, I don't worry too much about where my light source is coming from. I do try to keep things somewhat consistent, but mostly what I'm doing is, again, just coming in here and breaking up these big areas of color. So I'm using the white more to break up the areas of color than what I am to indicate highlights. But I do try to keep somewhat consistent. And what I mean by that is, like, for the eyes, if it's coming from the left, I want to make sure it's coming from the left on both eyes. Same thing like the lips, the nose, but I do add a little bit in other areas, just going by where it looks like there's too much area of just solid color. I want to break that up. And then I think I will add some snowflakes back here in the sky, make it look like it's snowing. And with this Jelly Roll pen, it goes over the markers really nicely. It does work a lot better if you let the markers dry. Obviously, if the paper's still wet, this is gonna absorb into the paper as well. But we're gonna go ahead and just do it to save time. Get this done. So I got some snow in the background. You could also use a paint marker to go over top. The paint markers work really well. So that is it for the Santa. And like I mentioned earlier, I like to do a series of my drawings. So whether I'm doing a reindeer or Christmas trees or a Santa Claus, I like to do several of them, because you can really start playing around with your designs and some different styles and different things. And you can change the way that your drawings look by how you do the outlines, the type of eyes, nose. There's different ways you can do the beard and the mustache, eyebrows, no eyebrows, the shape of the head. There's just a lot of different ways that you can add some variation to your drawing. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope you do some of your own Santa Claus drawings. And I will see you in the next video. Happy creating! Well, how'd you do? Did you make some of your own artwork? I hope you did. I hope you felt encouraged and motivated to start some of your own work. And I hope you feel inspired to keep working on your art. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like. And make sure you subscribe so you can see more videos from us when they get posted. I'll talk to you soon. Happy creating!